Sometimes love shows up when life is far too busy to dream. That's how it was for Hallie Duncan, a 26-year-old woman who never had the luxury of choosing her own path. Between long shifts at the pharmacy and the responsibility of caring for her younger siblings, she learned to be strong when everything around her seemed to demand that she fall apart. Her heart knew the weight of duty, but it also hid a quiet longing for something more. Across town, Bentley Chandler lived surrounded by numbers, contracts, and lavish dinner parties. At 39, he had what most people would call a perfect life: power, respect, and a fortune that could buy almost anything, except what he needed the most. In his eyes, there was always a shadow, as if the empire he built wasn't enough to fill the emptiness that followed him everywhere. Two worlds, two lives that were never meant to collide. Until that night. The city's annual ball was just another elegant event for some and a reckless mistake for others. But all it took was one awkward stumble on the dance floor for their paths to cross. Hallie fell into the arms of a stranger who didn't seem to fit into her world, yet whose genuine laughter broke down every barrier in an instant. And it's in that clash of worlds that the story begins. A woman carrying her family on her shoulders. A man torn between power and purpose, and a love that will cost them both more than they ever imagined, but might just be worth everything.
Ruby had that rare gift. She could talk anyone into anything. She insisted so much that Hallie, after hours of resistance, finally gave in. She traded her white pharmacy uniform for a simple blue dress that brought out her softness without drawing too much attention. While Ruby got ready with a sparkle in her eyes, Hallie took a deep breath, as if she were about to step into forbidden territory. Music was already echoing through the streets when they arrived, and every step Hallie took carried both the urge to disappear and a quiet longing for something she couldn't quite name. The ballroom shone as if every light bulb were its own little star. People laughed, toasted, and danced with an ease that didn't belong to her world. Hallie moved through the crowd with slight discomfort, clutching her small purse close to her body like a shield. The sweet scent of champagne, mixed with the expensive perfume of the women, felt like another language, one that didn't belong to her simple life. And yet, there was something magnetic in the air, as if a promise hovered just above her, waiting to fall. Ruby vanished among familiar faces, leaving Hallie near the dance floor. She watched the couple spin, fascinated by their grace and rhythm, both so far from her own reality. But one wrong step changed everything. Her heel caught in a small crack on the floor, and her body tilted forward. Before she could fall, a pair of strong hands caught her by the waist. The sudden contact stole her breath, and in that instant, she heard a laugh. Deep, warm, genuine. Her eyes lifted and met a face that was a mix of charm and mystery. He didn't just look elegant. There was a calm confidence in him, a spark of humor that melted any tension. Blushing, Hallie whispered an apology, but he shook his head lightly, as if that moment had been the best accident of the night. His laughter lingered in the air, like a melody only they could hear, a secret rhythm that didn't need words. Hallie took a step back, trying to regain her balance, but something inside her had already shifted. That brief encounter had lit a spark, an echo she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was curiosity. He looked at her as if he could see beyond the surface, as if he'd discovered something rare in the middle of the ordinary. Her heart, so used to the weight of responsibility, beat in a new rhythm, almost rebellious. Ruby soon returned, smiling, asking who the stranger was. Hallie looked away and said she didn't know, and maybe it was better that way. But the truth was, as the music played on and couples kept spinning around them, she couldn't shake the memory of that gaze, that laughter. Something inside her whispered that this stumble wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.
The next morning, Hallie woke up earlier than usual. The ball felt like a dream that didn't quite fit into her everyday life, and the memory of that elegant man still lingered in her mind. While arranging medicine bottles at the pharmacy, she couldn't resist telling Ruby about the unexpected encounter. Her friend, always connected to everything, immediately pulled out her phone and began typing names at an impressive speed, like someone playing a guessing game. It took only a few minutes for the surprise to appear. The mysterious stranger wasn't so mysterious after all. The screen glowed in front of Hallie's eyes, showing photos, headlines, and videos. Bentley Chandler, CEO of a national hospital network. A name surrounded by power and wealth. But what truly caught her off guard wasn't the title. It was a short interview clip where he let out that same warm laugh, the one that had made her blush the night before. Hallie pressed the phone to her chest as if trying to hold back a truth that could turn her world upside down. Her heart wavered between fascination and fear. It was easy to be captivated by a man like him, poised, confident, and undeniably influential. But where would she, a simple pharmacy clerk, ever fit into his world? The contrast was so striking it almost felt like a cruel joke from fate. Ruby, on the other hand, was delighted, laughing at the idea that Hallie might have caught the attention of someone so unreachable. The sparkle in her friend's eyes only fueled the quiet storm inside her. Meanwhile, Bentley couldn't find peace either. The image of the young woman in the blue dress wouldn't leave his mind. During meetings, while signing papers, even in business conversations, the thought kept returning. Those honest eyes, free of calculation, had left their mark. He replayed the moment over and over in his head like a movie in slow motion. And though he never said it out loud, he knew he wanted to see her again. That same night, Bentley opened his social media feeds, used to scrolling through a flood of praise and criticism. But for the first time, none of it meant anything. Among the endless likes and event photos, he was searching for something else, or rather, someone else. He didn't know her name or where she came from, but one thing felt certain: that encounter wasn't meant to fade away. And so, in worlds as distant as moonlight and sunlight, Hallie and Bentley held on to the memory of each other in silence. She tried to convince herself it was just a fleeting detail. He felt that a detail that small might change everything. But fate, ever restless, was already setting the next move in their story.
The days that followed brought encounters that at first seemed like pure coincidence. Hallie saw him from a distance, in crowded downtown cafes or driving down the streets that led to the pharmacy. Ruby joked that fate was rolling the dice in Hallie's favor, but Hallie insisted it was nothing more than chance. Still, every time Bentley's eyes met hers, there was a spark, a brief, suspended moment when the world around them seemed to pause. One of those encounters turned into a conversation. He greeted her with a smile that broke through any awkwardness and started talking about simple things: Boston's unpredictable weather, the city's constant rush, the best coffee shops in the neighborhood. Hallie replied shyly at first, but soon realized that behind the powerful CEO was a man who was curious, attentive, even vulnerable. The contrast disarmed her. How could someone so used to luxury be genuinely interested in everyday stories about kids asking for candy at the pharmacy? For Bentley, every minute spent talking to Hallie felt like taking a breath of fresh air. He was used to meetings filled with formalities, dinners driven by ambition, and carefully measured words. But she spoke simply, with honesty, without trying to impress. And that challenged him more than any high-stakes deal ever could. He was beginning to see the true worth wasn't found in numbers, but in the quiet tenderness of a woman who had nothing to prove. Hallie, however, couldn't silence her fears. She knew she didn't belong in his world. She noticed the expensive watch on his wrist, the way his imported car stood out on her narrow street, and she felt the distance between their realities. Part of her longed to give in to the growing connection between them, but another part remembered her responsibilities, her siblings, her modest life, the steady ground she couldn't afford to leave. That inner conflict made her swing between smiles and silence. There were moments when his presence made her forget everything, and others when a simple thought about bills, medicine, and duties pulled her right back to reality. Bentley sensed that back and forth, and instead of pulling away, he drew closer, as if trying to prove that he could fit into that small, carefully guarded space in her heart. Time went by, and without realizing it, they created a quiet ritual, unplanned encounters that became something both of them looked forward to. Words that sounded simple but carried undertones of longing, warmth, and a slow-burning flame. And with every goodbye came the growing sense that something bigger was taking shape, something that sooner or later would demand a choice.
It was an ordinary morning at the pharmacy when Hallie overheard two customers talking about the city's free clinic. There were rumors it might be closing soon, leaving many families without care. Her heart sank. That was where she took Maxwell for checkups and where Sloan had been treated during difficult times. That clinic wasn't just a building, it was a lifeline for people who couldn't afford anything else. What Hallie didn't know was how deeply this news would soon intertwine with her own heart. That same evening, during a casual meeting with Bentley, an innocent conversation led her to the truth. Without realizing it, he mentioned a tough meeting about budget cuts and restructuring. One word led to another until the name of the clinic slipped into the conversation. The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. Hallie's eyes widened and a chill ran down her spine. The man she was beginning to fall for was somehow connected to the possible shutdown of the place that kept her community alive. Her expression changed, and Bentley noticed right away. He tried to explain. It was just a business decision, he said, involving numbers and projections. But to her, those weren't numbers. They were faces, neighbors, friends, children who needed care. The corporate world he lived in clashed head-on with the raw reality of hers. The spark that once warmed their connection flickered under the cold wind of truth. Hallie stepped back, her heart in turmoil. The laughter, the easy conversations, the light in his eyes, all of it now blurred together with the shadow of what might soon be lost. She could barely look at Bentley without feeling a sting of betrayal, even though she knew he hadn't intentionally done anything to hurt her. The dilemma was cruel. How could she separate the man from the businessman, the affection from the power he represented? Bentley, meanwhile, felt more torn than ever. He was used to tough negotiations and hard decisions, but now he was seeing the human weight behind the numbers, something he had never allowed himself to feel before. The disappointment on Hallie's face was like facing a mirror, one that reflected everything he'd been avoiding in his career. For the first time, he began to wonder if he had been walking the right path at all. And in that moment, something between them broke. Or perhaps it changed, because even hurt, Hallie couldn't erase the bond she felt. And even torn, Bentley knew he couldn't simply let her go. The ball had only been the beginning. Now, the real dance was about to begin, and the next steps would be far more painful.
Hallie couldn't sleep that night. Bentley's words echoed in her mind like hammers. Restructuring, necessary cuts, board decision. For him, they were just technical terms. For her, they meant closed doors, children without medicine, families left with nothing. As she turned restlessly in bed, his face kept appearing, tangled with the image of empty shelves at the clinic. Her heart was at war, desire and pain battling inside her. When she finally confronted him, her words came out heavy with hurt. Hallie, eyes filled with tears, asked how someone so intelligent could be so blind to the human cost. Bentley tried to explain, saying it was just another business decision, but every excuse felt like a blow. For the first time, he found himself defenseless. The confidence he wore so easily gave way to a vulnerability he couldn't hide. Standing before her, it felt as if all his success had suddenly lost its shine. The silence between them grew thick, almost unbearable. Bentley reached out his hand, but Hallie stepped back. There was love beginning to grow, yes, but there was also a wall standing between them. Her gaze said more than 1,000 words. "I want to trust you. But how can I when what you do threatens everything I care about?" That tension, paradoxically, only made their bond stronger, because when the heart bleeds, that's when love shows its true depth. Bentley spent days tormented. In meetings with Xavier Whitmore, his ruthless business partner, he began to notice how cold and distant their words sounded, detached from any real sense of humanity. And all the while, Hallie's voice echoed in his mind, firm and clear, urging him to see beyond the numbers. For the first time in years, he felt torn between his role as CEO and the man he wanted to be. It was as if his desire to protect her outweighed any contract he'd ever signed. Hallie, meanwhile, tried to build walls. She avoided messages, kept her distance, telling herself she needed to focus on her family. But every time she closed her eyes, he was there. His warm laughter, the look that made her feel seen, the small gestures that spoke of tenderness. The conflict inside her grew stronger because denying her feelings felt like denying her own breath, and yet surrendering to them felt like betraying her community. Their romance had become a minefield. Kisses interrupted by arguments, smiles followed by tears, meetings that started light and ended heavy. It was as if they were both desperately trying to keep a fragile flame alive in the middle of a storm. But deep down, neither was ready to let go, because between love and duty, something far greater pulled them toward each other, the irresistible force of fate itself.
Despite everything, there was something irresistible pulling them back together. Hallie could try to avoid him, but the moment she heard Bentley's voice or felt his presence, her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her heart raced, her eyes searched for his, and the silence between them carried an electric tension that said more than words ever could. It wasn't just romance, it was a fire that burned against all logic. One night, after a heated argument, the silence between them broke into a kiss. There was no plan, only urgency. The touch of their hands, the warmth of their lips, the quickened breath, everything seemed to say, "I can't stay away from you." It was a stolen moment, secret and forbidden, yet it made them feel more alive than they had in years. Still, when the kiss ended, the weight of what stood between them returned like a shadow. Their next encounters became a mix of tenderness and transgression. They walked down quiet streets together, laughed at silly jokes like teenagers, and exchanged knowing glances in public places where no one suspected a thing. Yet deep down, they feared being discovered, not because of society, but because of what it meant, a love growing on ground destined to crumble. When Bentley was with her, he allowed himself to forget the corporate world, and Hallie, for a few precious moments, set aside her worries about Maxwell and Sloan. Together they built an invisible refuge where only the two of them existed, surrounded by affection, surrender, and a passion that overflowed. But with every goodbye, reality returned, harsh and cold, reminding them that they were living a love that broke the rules. Hallie often caught herself smiling alone, remembering his small gestures, the way he brushed a strand of hair from her face, or how he laughed at himself when something went wrong. But the smile would fade quickly, replaced by the awareness of the gap between them. Loving Bentley was both sweet and painful, like tasting a rare wine, knowing the glass could shatter at any moment. Bentley, on the other hand, could no longer pretend to be indifferent. Every touch, every word from Hallie pushed him closer to a point of no return. The passion kept growing, even when they tried to hold it back, and the unspoken question lingered in the air. How far could they go before the weight of the consequences crushed them both? The passion that once bound them together was starting to collide with the cold walls of the real world. Bentley walked into meetings only to face ruthless spreadsheets and reports pointing to unavoidable cuts. Xavier Whitmore, his longtime business partner, made no effort to hide his impatience. "If we don't shut down the clinic, we'll lose millions," he repeated in his sharp tone, as if reminding Bentley where his priorities should be. But behind the numbers, Hallie's face kept appearing, like a ghost refusing to be ignored. Hallie was fighting her own battle. Maxwell dreamed of becoming a doctor, inspired by the very clinic now at risk. Little Sloane, innocent and curious, asked if she could still see Dr. Armstrong for her next appointment. Every word from her little sister felt like a dagger in Hallie's heart, tearing her between the tenderness she felt for Bentley and the anger toward the power he represented. How could she fully trust a man who might destroy the future of the people she loved most? The pressure was closing in from every direction. Ruby, ever the protective friend, warned Hallie to stay away. "This romance will only hurt you," she said, trying to shield her. But even knowing the risks, Hallie couldn't simply cut the tie. When she looked at Bentley, she didn't just see a businessman. She saw the man who had held her close at the dance, who laughed freely, who looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. That duality tore her apart, leaving her suspended between reason and heart. Bentley, meanwhile, was beginning to realize that his power wasn't as untouchable as he once believed. In the past, a single signature could fix any problem. But now, with Hallie in the picture, every decision carried a human cost. For the first time, he doubted the reflection staring back at him. Who was the man in the mirror? The cold, pragmatic CEO, or the one slowly learning what it meant to truly give of himself? The confrontation between them became inevitable. Hallie stood her ground, refusing vague promises. "This isn't just about us," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "It's about an entire community. If you choose profit, you're choosing against me." Her words burned into Bentley's chest like a brand. He knew he couldn't have both worlds, and sooner or later, he would have to decide. And so, the love that once united them turned into a silent battlefield. Long stares ending in tears, hands intertwined but shaking with uncertainty. Kisses that carried the bittersweet taste of goodbye. The weight of the choice grew unbearable, like a shadow following them everywhere, reminding them that the future would not wait to be decided.
The board was gathered in a large, glass-walled room, the city lights stretching out behind them like a chessboard of power. Xavier Whitmore spoke with force, leaning on charts and projections. "Closing the clinic is inevitable. We can't sustain something that doesn't generate returns." His words hit like hammer blows, each one reminding Bentley of what he was supposed to do. But beneath the cold voices, the memory of Hallie's eyes burned within him, a truth impossible to silence. For a moment, Bentley stayed silent, watching the executives' impassive faces around the table. Each of them saw numbers, statistics, percentages. He saw Maxwell dreaming of becoming a doctor, Sloane clutching a stuffed bear while waiting for care, Hallie standing in the clinic, strong and vulnerable all at once. It was there, in that moment, that his heart faced its final battle. Billions in profit versus a love that couldn't be bought. The weight of the decision made him sweat, unusual for a man used to controlling entire rooms with a glance. When he finally spoke, his voice was firmer than he expected. "The clinic will remain open." The silence that followed was deafening.
Xavier stared at him, as if witnessing a betrayal. Others murmured objections and disbelief. But Bentley, calm and resolute, repeated, "If we need to cut somewhere else, so be it. This decision is mine." The consequences were immediate. The press reported his bold move, the market reacted with criticism, and part of his corporate reputation began to crumble. Yet, for the first time in years, Bentley felt no fear of the impact. There was an unexpected lightness in choosing something that couldn't be measured in dollars. Deep down, he knew he might lose allies, contracts, perhaps even a part of the empire he'd built. But he also knew he was gaining something infinitely more valuable. Meanwhile, at the small clinic, the announcement was received like a miracle. The community gathered around Dr. Elaine Armstrong, who cried as she told families that the doors would remain open. Hallie, hearing the news, felt her knees weaken. Warm tears ran down her face. It wasn't just relief, it was proof that in Bentley's heart, she was never just a detail. Amid corporate chaos and the city's joy, the fate of the two finally seemed to align. Bentley's gesture didn't erase all pain or instantly solve every conflict, but it proved a fundamental truth. He had chosen not only for love, but for purpose, and that changed everything. The world might see him as a CEO who lost part of his empire. Hallie, however, saw the man who had gained something impossible to lose.
The days that followed were ones of rebuilding. Bentley, though facing more criticism than ever before, finally seemed at peace with himself. Headlines in the papers were divided between praising his boldness and calling him reckless, but in the halls of the clinic, the story was different. Every smile, every gesture of gratitude, every tight hug from the families told him that he had made the right choice. And that quiet validation was worth more than any number on a balance sheet. Hallie, still grounded in reality, watched it all with tears in her eyes. It wasn't just the clinic that was standing strong, it was Maxwell's dream that now seemed possible. Bentley approached the boy, listened to his plans to study medicine, and without hesitation offered support. Not a handout, but a real opportunity. Internships, guidance, access to people who could open doors. Maxwell, eyes shining, saw in Bentley not just a businessman, but an unexpected mentor. Little Sloane, with her childlike innocence, ran up to Bentley at one of the visits and hugged him without hesitation, as if he were already part of the family. This simple gesture melted any remaining resistance in Hallie. It was as if the child's pure heart had seen something the adults had been slow to admit. When love is real, no barrier can stand in its way. That hug carried silent acceptance, a hope that lit up everything around it. For the first time in a long while, Hallie allowed herself to breathe deeply and dream. She no longer had to choose between caring for her family and living her own romance. She realized it was possible to hold both worlds in her heart, as long as she didn't lose herself. With Bentley by her side, she felt that love wasn't a burden, but a force that made her stronger, more whole. Bentley had learned his lesson too. He understood that true power didn't lie in secure contracts or billion-dollar profits, but in the ability to change lives. Hallie had shown him that, without a single speech, just through the honesty in her eyes. Holding her hand, he knew he had lost much in the market, but he had gained everything that really mattered. They weren't just a man and a woman together, they were two worlds that, when joined, had created something greater than either could have achieved alone. And so, amid long embraces, whispered promises, and glances that spoke louder than words, Hallie and Bentley discovered that the future didn't have to be perfect to be worth it. It only had to be real. And this time, there were no stumbles, no goodbyes, just the certainty that finally they were ready to walk together, side by side, toward everything that was still to come.
In the end, Hallie discovered that loving someone didn't mean giving up who she was. It meant reaffirming her strength. Bentley, in turn, realized that true power isn't found in contracts or numbers, but in the ability to choose what gives life meaning. Two very different lives, daring to meet, proved that real love requires courage and rewards with something no amount of money can buy. Stories like this remind us that the human heart can face its greatest battles when the flame of passion is ignited, that no obstacle is too big when affection guides us. And just like Hallie and Bentley, each of us has the chance to rewrite our own path. If this story touched you, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." Your words can inspire others to believe that there's always hope, even at life's most difficult crossroads. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience with every episode emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here, every story is a reminder that love isn't chance. It's a daily choice of surrender and truth. And remember, this is just one of many stories that will move you here, because in the end, love always finds a way.